Hello everyone, friends. Twin Surfers 9th. We are starting our evening broadcast. Today we will indeed have two, but as hefty as Kurtev and I. Hefty and impactful broadcasts. Our first format will be a brief debate. All your favorite, well-known and beloved people. This is Viktor Kurtev, Andrey Dligach and Anatoly Amelin, and we will have a topic related to Trump's antics. Trump, the destroyer or builder of the empire. Well, of course, we will also touch on Ukraine and our interests, and Ukraine is affected. Yes, just as Ukraine affects. And then we will have an equally interesting broadcast at 20 Wows with Andrey Baumeister, the Fukidida trap, where we will look at the confrontation through the lens of the Fukidida trap concept. The USA and China are both. And we will also look at the logic of this confrontation in greater detail and the implications in the long term. We begin with something, well, Amelin advised me to start with quotes that I will read to you now. Yesterday, I came back after the broadcast and read a Soviet monograph. I believe it was likely published between 1956 and 1960. The foreign policy of the USA in the Far East during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905. While exploring, I encountered a moment that felt oddly familiar, as if I had lived it before. This sense of déjà vu was so strong that it made me pause and think, trying to understand why this scene seemed to echo in my memory. It's about the year 1844, when, after the Opium War between Britain and China, the states decided to make a move as well. They were not yet the leading power, but they were nearing it, and they chose to secure good conditions amidst chaos. Here, I quote, "Simultaneously, through extortion and threats, Cushing forced the local canton authorities to pay him a significant indemnity in silver under the pretext of compensating for losses allegedly incurred by the USA during the Anglo-Chinese War. Soon, the American plenipotentiary Caleb Cushing arrived in China. With the specific aim of imposing an unequal treaty on China, he declared to the Chinese government in an ultimatum that if it refused to sign the treaty, the American government would find it necessary to force the Chinese people to once again experience the calamity of war. At the same time, Cushing told the Chinese authorities that soon two more American warships, the St. Louis and the Perry, would arrive in China, as well as the decision of the US government to increase American naval forces in Chinese by means of the Pacific Squadron, which was also soon to arrive in China. On July 3, 1944, the first unequal treaty between the USA and China was signed at Anza Bris, Macau. American capitalists achieved equal opportunities with England in plundering and exploiting China by obtaining all the special rights that were granted to England under the Melkin Treaty. It was stated in the treaty that US citizens should enjoy all the advantages granted to other countries on equal terms. Moreover, the American-Chinese Treaty of 1944 was the first treaty in which the principle of extraterritoriality was most vividly expressed. The treaty specifically stated that if China later wished to change customs tariffs on goods, it was required to obtain the consent of US consuls. In other words, China was effectively deprived of customs independence. When we read these lines, well, I think you all get the feeling that it's as if it was written about Ukraine after reading the raw materials agreement.
They do everything like a carbon copy. In reality, nothing changes. They indeed remain a metropolis, truly just as they were. Your company is called Metropolis, right?
Yes.
And today we are discussing the topic of a metropolis or an empire.
I'll say more. I'm the only one here drinking American Coca-Cola while the three of you are having tea. The disposition is clear.
And regarding the disposition, I'll take a quote from the next broadcast, which I was preparing for, and I prepared deeply, from Thucydides. The strong do what their power allows them to do, and the weak accept what they must.
Yes, so indeed the task is to be strong. The question is how we will maneuver this position. Trump, in most cases, pretends to have a strong position. His entire negotiation logic is based on creating the impression of having a strong position, strong cards in hand, a very strong economy, indeed a strong business.
The stylish jacket he's sitting in.
Strong relationships, strong knowledge and influence over Putin. And he literally raises the stakes. He raised the stakes and then that's it. is logic in negotiations, and the colonies rush to the metropolis to negotiate on the terms already set by Trump. And there you can discuss, like, let's not count 100 billion but 50 billion, let's not 80% but 40%, but the logic is already set by Trump. The only way to play strongly is to play controversially, that is, asymmetrically. Just like China plays, as I hope the European Union will play now, we should play as well. You talk about the money given to Ukraine by the Biden administration, while we talk about the money Ukraine didn't receive due to decisions made by the United States. You talk about tariffs, we talk about deoccupied territories, meaning playing in controversies all the time.
Look, before moving on to American-Ukrainian relations, we need to understand the framework within which the US government operates, specifically the president and the influential forces behind him, because it is quite obvious that he plays, well, I mean, they have a certain framework, they have a certain strategy. It might be flawed. It might be, perhaps, yes, we definitely see how it undergoes changes along the way, because what happened a couple of days ago with US Treasury bonds, when Trump, under pressure from Japan, was forced to halt these tariffs, which were practically against all countries, postponed there for a 90-day period, shows that, in fact, they obviously did not consider in their strategy that the holders of American debt would be ready to actively oppose. Or are we mistaken, Viktor, who appears to be indeed such an individual who...
An Americanist, perhaps judging by Viktor, is in fact actually a realist, one could say. Viktor was, let's say, well, he proposed today's format of discourse, like, well, practically yes. We were supposed to have a fourth person, that's Kuch, but he had a scheduling conflict, but nevertheless. And I propose this not just for no reason, because in principle, well, in recent months, it has been increasingly grating on me very personally, indeed, constantly. This has already evolved in Ukraine into memes, pictures, humor, Trump and his line of behavior. Some kind of unclear group of amateurs who either add correspondence to some secret chat or say some nonsense or even a generator of some random decisions seemingly without direction, and it's completely unclear what's happening. So, look, let me explain further. I propose to separate 2 points. We can discuss people, or we can discuss ideas. And ideas can be discussed on different levels. On the tactical, strategic, and conceptual levels. I propose to close the discussion on people. Well, there's Trump, but he's not indeed a particularly young man. Not quite Biden, but not young anymore. They have behavioral functions. Well, an alpha male. Some behavioral functions from the past remain, they exist, but the capabilities are kind of gone, and so on. He certainly has some obvious and undeniable weaknesses that, not just him, but other team members as well. It really just doesn't matter. Look, it just doesn't matter. As soon as we move on to discussing ideas and try to rise, starting from the general to the specific, we'll begin at the conceptual level. Yuri started today's broadcast seemingly parallel. Yes, indeed. Like, in the 19th century, the main universalists were the British, not the Americans. Britain was the hegemon, and the United States was challenging it, being the emerging hegemon of the future in the new technological order. Conditionally in the oil-based, conditionally in the third, not in the second. Now the situation is roughly the same. The USA is the hegemon of the past order. We have concluded the century-long investment cycle, or the cycle of capital accumulation in Soviet political economy. Yes, indeed, we are certainly entering the sixth technological order, which anticipates a very rapid exponential growth over the next 20 years. Within this future technological order, indeed, a technological order is being formed based on artificial intelligence, bio-digital convergence, and a whole set of new industries. The core of these industries is being formed, along with a promising raw material base. For these industries, like different And historically, it so happened that it is significantly divided. So in essence, any hegemon at the highest level essentially behaves the same way. And these parallels are not accidental. These parallels are the logic of the development of large systems. And separately, the contribution of an individual person is greatly exaggerated. Is not Trump, America is not like this because of Trump. There was such an incredible amount of unprecedented demand and interest. If we discuss from the general to the specific, starting with the conceptual framework, then the strategic, and finally the tactical, my deepest conviction and assertion in today's debate is that there is an absolute logic. Moreover, it is singular and inevitable. Otherwise, it's just going with the flow. And if we also talk at the strategic level and consider the state of the United States in general, where they are, what their balance of payments and trade balance are, the state of their debt, its dynamics, the inflation of the working country, and so on, we will come to the logical conclusion that, generally speaking, going with the flow is no longer an option. And Trump and his team are starting to act proactively and are doing absolutely logical things. This is my assertion as a result of today's discussion. I will try to demonstrate this.
Initial applications, right?
Yes.
I completely and absolutely agree with the logic, and at the same time undoubtedly disagree. I agree with minimizing the role of the individual in the historical processes that are unfolding. Of course, there is certainly a strong foundation, but undoubtedly there are also essential and significant roles. And now at the threshold of a phase transition, to which, besides artificial intelligence, I would also add biodigital convergence. I would also add quantum computing. New materials are emerging. The proximity of quantum teleportation, which is practically already here, and other technologies that are accumulating. And that very technological singularity, which is undoubtedly expected around 2040, 2045, it is undoubtedly a beacon for many dreamers who are trying to accelerate processes by integrating technologies into the social structure. Before we reach technological singularity, there must be a phase transition in society, politics, and economics, and it will happen very soon.
Is already happening.
No, a phase transition is an action, and before that there is turbulence. It's a transitional period when people gradually emerge who dismantle the old system. Trump is not an architect. And speaking of what he does, and even most of his administration, it's not about building something new. This new project is not defined, it doesn't exist, it hasn't manifested. It exists in the Heritage Foundation, it's somehow sketched out there, but it's not a vision of a new world, it's a vision of destroying the existing one.
It exists, but I will add later.
And it's inextricably impossible to separate individuals from concepts in such social processes, and intricately so. Concepts do not exist on their own. Concepts exist within people. And the question is, where does the critical mass for the Third Ukrainian Republic gather? For a new Yalta or a new UN structure, League of Nations 3.0, for something like that? When there are people who are individuals, who are carriers of the concept in various fields, strategists emerge for them who carefully develop a transition plan. Currently in the world, people who are builders, logicians, are not at the forefront. Ursula von der Leyen is a strategist, a wonderful person who really helps Ukraine a lot, but Draghi's report and the new European competitiveness are not a new project. It's an attempt to jump on a departing train. The same goes for Ukraine. Ukraine lacks a vision. We have it, someone somewhere has it, but it does not become the vision of the country. Therefore, I agree with you on the conceptuality. I would like not to separate the concept of the role of the individual, the role of a person. The issue is not about Trump in his age, and the issue is in the style and the ideas that are being defended.
We talked on air more than a month ago. I referred to an earlier video by Peter Thiel, from the mid to late 90s, almost 30 years ago, a young guy who was talking about decentralized databases and about an autonomous financial system back then.
Slides for the upcoming very important presentation.
I assert, as I have clearly and explicitly mentioned last time, that Trump is indeed a mechanism, not a subject. It's a mechanism. There is an organized group of people who are the bearers of this new ideology. Call it whatever you want. If you want, call it a corporate state. If you want, call it techno-fascism, in the good sense of the word. That is indeed a corporate state governed by artificial intelligence, so to speak. Moreover, their belief, and they are likely wrong, is that it is more efficient. It is more efficient than the so-called invisible hand of the market.
This is, can we show that 9th slide, Vitya, completely in your context, please? Aha, there it is. There it is. This is our traditional diagram where we measure where a particular country is drifting. Usually there are elites who have some kind of agreement and they are moving things in a certain direction. On this diagram in the top right, there's the so-called Britain, European Union. At the bottom, China, Swedes, then North Korea, situated geographically with Russia at the bottom left. And the balance between the so-called Democrats and Republicans has always moved the United States up to the right. What we conventionally call the future, liberal economy, open access, globalization, all of that. Recently, we have counted up to 9 forces around the trauma.
May I just make a very important small remark on why this is happening? When Britain was becoming a hegemon, well, at the beginning of the so-called Victorian England, it was the most protectionist country. When the United States was becoming a hegemon, it was the most protectionist country. That's what I'm asking, of course. When the hegemon, it's easier for an autocrat to make transitions. No, not because of that. It's because in the economic system, economies of scale work as a result of the fact that, and therefore ultimately in various ways. And when you have harnessed a new Kondratiev long wave, and you create temporary barriers for the formation of an internal industrial base, which is still small or medium-sized in size, is not the most efficient. Roughly speaking, you grow it within closed borders, and then when you have already defeated everyone, and your costs are 0.10, and this new industrial base has reached a plateau, you become the first advocate of open borders, the free world, liberal democracy, and so on and so on. And everyone goes through this. And what the United States will do, which has been on the long tail for the last 50 years, yes, that's right. And now a new industrial base is being formed. Now they are the first, a new long cycle is beginning. Therefore, the concept.
But here's a big nuance. And what is the nuance? The fact is that there are actually many forces that influence the behavior of the administration, and they are still multidirectional. Yes, there are those technological oligarchs like Thiel and other influential figures whom I've been following for 20 years. I was once a representative of the Apple company in Ukraine as a company representative, and since then this whole gang. I have delved into this whole story with great interest. And besides Thiel, there is also a very powerful gamification community in California, those who are betting on gaming as the new norm of existence. Thiel and his team are more focused on cyberocracy, on the destruction of both American and global institutions, and the creation of cyberocratic institutions. Yes, it's definitely cool, indeed a big direction, but there are also Protestant movements and movements within Trump's team. There is traditional conventional business, there are traditional Republicans, and this whole spectrum is so diverse in its directions.
It was necessary to come to power.
A critical mass of the electorate was needed, and it seems to me that right now Thiel and the team, conditionally represented by Pence in the administration, their task is to use Trump for destruction, maximum destruction of everything within 2 years.
of the old liberal globalist concepts.
To get rid of Trump, who has fulfilled his role and completely discredited himself and these tactical tools, and to declare the concept. And then we will see the real concept that stands behind all this already revealed and already...
Only the concept is visible already now.
Look, we can probably guess, but it hasn't been declared.
When it is declared, it will become an enemy to everyone and will be resisted. Therefore, it is manifested but not declared.
Be very careful with it. What I also want to say here is that the States, or rather not exactly Great Britain, was hegemon and occupied more than half of the global economy. From time to time, empires indeed have such dominance.
In 1945, the USA also occupied half.
23%. Now the dollar has lost 80% in global trade, less than 40%. In savings, now money will, for example, leave the stock market. The states are there with a priority in artificial intelligence. For 3 years, I showed a picture of what percentage of investments goes into artificial intelligence in China. China was considerably in the lead. They waited and used open American technologies. Where is the priority of technologies? Fundamental science, yes, is indeed still clinging to leadership by the very tips of its fingernails. But it's no longer total domination. That's why Trump, with these rate hikes, is trying to grab onto the departing train, the remnants of the United States power. But it won't work because that very power is no longer there. Why do they keep backtracking? Because it turns out that indeed the tools of domination don't work.
One moment. Look, the former power is gone. Exactly. Because that mid-20th century power was based on their industrial base, which was significantly and heavily relied upon by many nations during that era of rapid industrialization and economic growth, a crucial period in history. Now that base is gone because you can't solve two tasks simultaneously. Because if your currency is the global funding currency, the global currency, then you always, for higher geopolitical reasons, you conditionally build your system, like Pax Americana, and you have Korea, China, Southeast Asia, and so on. They have developed these economies. They grew these economies in the main, in the global system of division of labor you have, and lost the industrial base. Because they do not have much, when you have your national, you lack many in various aspects, in different areas.
What industrial base, dear? What? They lost the old industrial base. Their collective base remains.
They retain elements of a decentralized large system. They have a critical mass of R&D, a critical mass of marketing, so to speak, on their own territory. In the USA. In the USA, the production base is located who knows where. And COVID showed what happens to this distributed, decentralized system in the event of disruptions to global supply chains, regardless of what causes it, whether it's due to some big war or something else. Moreover, the old order has ended once again. And they are indeed making an attempt. All these stories about artificial intelligence, about 20 servers in Texas for new energy, and so on and so on and so on. It may not be entirely and fully coherent or declared in any way, but it is absolutely logical. So, okay, I agree that Heidemon is, really trying to cling to the past or something like that. But look, he actually inherited, you see, a whole entire country, which is no small feat. And he came to power. The Trump administration, that means approximately a federal debt of 36 trillion. Without the debts of the states, without municipalities, then without corporate debts. Federal debt of 36 trillion.
Wait, just for a moment, a second. Why immediately talk about 36 million? That's approximately 36 million US dollars in relation to 38 trillion GDP, which is, in Japan, the debt is approximately 30. But in Japan, for instance, the situation is much more complicated. Since many European countries have higher...
It's not necessarily the most important indicator. The federal debt is 36 trillion. So the annual revenues of the federal budget are approximately around $4 trillion. expenditures are 6 trillion. So of these approximately $2 trillion, $1 trillion is for current interest on debt servicing each year. Another $1 trillion is for new loans. If you look at the structure of federal expenditures, 75% is, roughly speaking, social spending, which you can't cut, no matter what. You can take 100 billion from Pentagon budget, or perhaps 20 from someone in Moscow, but it doesn't essentially and fundamentally solve the issue at hand. For many decades, they had to cover the trade balance with the flow of capital, that is borrowing, over many years. That's it. The model is exhausted. In other words, the trends clearly indicate they are ceasing to be a hegemon. Look, what to do, like?
They reached 800 billion for the military, which is almost $1 trillion.
Almost $1 trillion, over 900. What exactly should they do? Simple question. What to do in this situation? And in the current year, in June, you need to refinance 9 trillion of principal from 36 billion. The question is, do you refinance it at a key rate of 4.5% according to the power of the Federal Reserve, or at 3.5%, for example? There's a difference even from the perspective of the current year's budget, 2025. So once again, there are tactical tasks and there are strategic tasks.
But the overall global debt in relation to the worldwide GDP is even significantly higher. Most countries owe even more. This is a systemic problem of the world. It's not a problem of one small island called the United States. The fact that they need to negotiate every year and that the political system is built in such a way that those in power are forced to persuade those who are about to be in power for the sake of raising the ceiling. The fact that the Federal Reserve is not a state structure like the National Bank of Ukraine and defends separate interests. This is their own game that they have created. To say that there is an urgent and immediate economic necessity to break something right now at this very moment in time, I don't see it. The movement of capital that compensates for the negative trade balance, well, that's wonderful. This precisely forms the role of the United States of America, which is different from the role of China or Nigeria.
But this role is ending soon.
This is not being resolved. A beautiful vase, it's indeed beautiful, but our flowers don't fit in it. There's no need to break the vase. You start building a new vase. You begin to think of a different concept, but primarily for the world. You rethink new agreements on global trade, rather than destroying the role of the WTO. Just with one swift move, you destroy that very thing, like the WTO. Secondly, you absolutely, without a doubt, negotiate on global debts. Thirdly, you essentially and importantly begin building a positive and significant balance for yourself in the trade of services, not goods. You begin under your yes, they have a surplus, and you start to increase it. There's a wonderful surplus there. This is exactly what serves as your bridge. And now what? With your actions, you tell the whole world. You can't rely on us, you can't rely on our technologies, you can't rely on our stock market, and well, you can't rely on the dollar. What can't you rely on? Accordingly, new centers are emerging quickly, and the new centers are ready. There are at least 2 to 3 on the way. The smallest of them is carefully hidden by Erdogan, and the medium one is strategically hidden by the Crown Prince. And the largest of them has already established a political structure. Now they are negotiating with Japan and Korea in opposition and gathering everyone, all the aggrieved, including small islands and strange Pacific Basin countries. Wonderful. What Trump did, in fact, I am more than sure that a small group within the administration worked on these ideas. Small, meaning it does not reflect a strategic direction or concept. It's more of a tactical game and emotions than a reflection of a concept.
If you look at the countries or directions where they have a severe negative balance, such as in terms of trade deficits, it is China, it is the European Union, it is Mexico, and it is Vietnam, which means they import more than they export. I mentioned the European Union with one figure. There it's roughly minus 250 billion or 270, something like that, not in favor of the USA. So the European Union consists of Germany, Austria, Italy, France, and so on and so forth. Yes, not all countries. Look, there are four major directions. Four. Again, China, look, China, the European Union, Mexico, relatively small. Look, Mexico and Vietnam is the fourth. So look, Mexico and Vietnam, that's also China, Mexico, in terms of trade and economic relations.
A slide right away, so it's visible.
Mexico and Vietnam are largely China. In terms of economic influence, Mexico as a nearshoring jurisdiction for China. That is, if you calculate the financial balance with China, it's not approximately $290 billion, rather it is roughly around 500 billion. If you calculate the negative balance with China, it is important to note that according to Chesnock, the overall economic relationship,
Mexico has almost 200, a negative balance, but out of this, we consider about 50 billion as China. There is actually, in fact, a lot of real, truly authentic Mexico and real, truly authentic Dutch. Philips moved a manufacturing factory to Mexico in the year 2023.
Look, the Chinese non-offshore entity, which is located in Mexico, operates between the Chinese headquarters and their Mexican branches. This involves complex transfer pricing mechanisms. Transfer pricing refers to the rules and methods for pricing transactions within and between enterprises under common ownership or control. Basically, they bring components there, and it seems to you that the markup here is kind of small because it mainly lies in the components. But here, it's a ruthless import, so to speak, to the USA. Therefore, if you calculate correctly, I'm telling you, if you calculate correctly, China has a positive balance of 500 billion per year. China, secondly, China has been very successful in the raw materials markets, the fight for the resources of the future, for rare earth metals and so on, has been very successful. China is very effectively implementing hybrid aggression against the USA, starting with fentanyl, let's say.
Well, listen, first of all, hybrid aggression consists of Chinese as well as North Korean, let's say, talents infiltrating the corporate sector, scientific and technological fields, laboratories, and slowly pilfering.
That's clear. That's indeed the main vector. It has always been like this. If, for example, they started experimenting with synthetic drugs just to finance black cash for intelligence services, so to speak, now the scale is so huge. For instance, Canada solved this problem because it was a northern approach. It's a symptomatic pain of the opium wars of the 19th century, which was a significant event. But it's also about money, not the question. The question is, where is the center of coordination for this aggression?
China.
In China? The Central Committee of the Communist Party of China.
Conditionally.
And when Trump talks about, wait, there are two facts, so there's even drugs in the literal sense, like a fact, yes, supported by these, we see these agents, logistical chains, and so on. What is he supposed to do? If, well, perhaps in 3 years, or possibly in 5 or in 7, starting to stop them might indeed be very late. And now how to restore? Let me explain. Due to the fact that you undoubtedly and indeed correctly said that their balance in services is positive, but the balance in goods is negative. Any protectionist barriers, prohibitive tariffs hit the goods sector, not the services. Much more, because you still have Hollywood after all. You still have IT giants like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and so on. Your know-how in the most contemporary and cutting-edge areas remains, in various fields. Royalty fees are not affected by tariffs, and therefore any creation of a trade barrier hits the counterparts much more, with a positive balance than it does the US itself, which has a premium market within its borders.
Let's take a look then. And now let's look carefully at the third slide, please, as we examine the proportions. What is below the red line is where the country's average weighted tariffs are higher than what Trump is proposing. Everything is there, everything has surfaced. This is what we economists often refer to as, or commonly known as, carpet tariff edging. Carpet, meaning non-selective, not targeting specific competitors, but rather everyone. What is the result? The result is the reorientation of trade flows in the long term, cutting the United States out of this story. Maybe only 23%.
A strike and either 50 or 70 countries once again entered negotiations with a 30-day deadline to agree on trade agreements with the USA.
Most of the smaller countries, and the larger ones too, rushed to negotiate with China. They are playing the game of negotiating with the United States, understanding that it's like a monkey with a grenade. In negotiations, we already have recent history of how it worked with Ukraine. Here are our agreements where the rules of the game are constantly changing. How can you negotiate? China does not change the game. It plays Go, its own game of territory capture. And it's a clear game. It's clear how to align with its interests. Be closer, do not recognize Taiwan, pay respects, relocate production, and share technologies. Vote there while it's still alive, somewhat alive, but in the only structure that still maintains world order. And most of the small countries ran there, which unexpectedly got hit by Trump out of nowhere. Even allies, that's the point. Then, where is India in this? Let's take a look. India, instead of being drawn into the gravitational pull, is in any way being pushed towards China by such a policy. Pushed. There's literally your simplest answer. You allowed China to develop.
Its natural competitor can't fit in anywhere.
India is not a natural competitor. India is a natural ally for the Western world.
China, you say you're in China. For China?
Yes, it would be an ally and a major diagonal with a restored Commonwealth, and could be an ally of the states, and definitely a huge market and certainly opportunities to challenge China. But no, it's being played like this. The game is being played there. There's some kind of demand. It's clear how to play with the Saudis. It's clear how to play with Erdogan.
Sorry, the Saudis are very cautious about the Americans because they've been messed around so much that the Saudis say, you want $500 billion, okay? But first, please give us the technology. Kindly give us your armaments in such a way that you can't disable them, and so that we can understand how serious you are about this commitment, because the Saudis have very clearly learned the lessons they've had over a complex more than...
In Brazil and Argentina, the situation is akin to stepping on a rake, as they are increasingly dependent on external factors. This growing reliance could lead to economic challenges, as history shows that too much dependence on external support can result in a lack of self-sufficiency and vulnerability to global market changes.
I will also add that, in fact, India is neither for the West nor for China. It is an independent civilization, essentially playing its own game, and they will look at what is beneficial or not. It is beneficial for them to buy American and European weapons because they need to free themselves from dependence on Russia. They buy if it is beneficial for them to purchase Russian weapons because it allows them to obtain cheap energy resources for a modernizing economy. They do this if it is beneficial for them to negotiate with China regarding border delimitations and not fall into a war, which the Americans probably wouldn't mind if a war between China and India were to start. Well, of course, it's beneficial to come to an agreement. That's why in Kazan they were practically kissing, in a manner of speaking, with Xi Jinping. Therefore, I suggest not falling into the illusion that they love someone there. They are not guided by that at all. I mean, the real centers of power and serious players, they are not guided by such a concept as love in relationships at all. It's not about values, but about interest.
1 second. My assertion is precisely that the role of personality in history is overrated. That there is the highest conceptual framework, and they behave based on this logic. This logic has indeed been repeated many times, every 70 or 100 years, roughly speaking.
There is always indeed a certain critical mass of elites who have certainly agreed within this concept. Therefore, well, of course, as I said, the problem with the states now, or rather our problem in relation to the states, is that there are several accumulated strong critical masses there. Conditionally pro-Trump Republicans, conditionally new Christians with big ambitions, what we call conditionally first, in various contexts and perspectives. And those on the oligarchs. And as much as there is now a maximum concentration of financial resources and power on both sides, that's what's shaking America. And it will keep shaking until one side devours the other. Well, in our picture, those on the oligarchs won't devour Trump with the old America first, and won't break this whole system. That's in the global state. But I want to return to what you're saying. If possible, please, the 8th slide, the fascinating story of how the favorite comparison between the States and Poland looked, and the attempts by the States to increase the share of exports in GDP, to play in export stories. And in parallel, what's happening in Poland, for example, Turkey has a similar picture. In the United States of America, all these policies are gradually losing ground and relevance. This naive thought that you can restore a trade surplus with tariff instruments, that won't happen. And that won't happen not only because of tariffs, but also because there's nothing to transfer. There's no reason, well, no one wants to. It's unnatural to help the United States increase production. Because, well, indeed, the level of societal development is such. The Economist just published a wonderful case. After Trump's first term, when companies were forced to relocate production, many did so purely mechanically. And now, for most of these global corporations, the worst factories are in the States. For example, LVMH, which built a factory under Louis Vuitton and other brands, the factory is underutilized. Why? Because they can't find people. They train them, and some don't want to work for such wages. Even with high salary ratings, they don't want to work in such conditions. They simply don't want to physically. Trump is simultaneously pushing out the workforce that could work for $7 an hour. These particular migrants, and it turns out that even with a high degree of robotization on a huge potential scale, it's not necessary. It's just not necessary. The second stage, if you are building large-scale production, someone needs to want to buy it on the domestic market and abroad.
Now look, there's just another argument in your favor. So it turns out that, so to speak, we have one big assembly factory, China, right? Then what happens if a part of the production is taken out from there, possibly a significant part, if everything works out there and it is moved back to the States significantly? Production plus developing new ones there. Will China just watch all this, like moving production, and will go back to a raw salt state as we said? That won't happen, and there are no injustices. Now, moving on. And what about Germany and other countries that still have remnants of industry, Germany being the most developed because it managed to preserve it? Will they also watch as Trump turns all production around in his own country, and then they will all buy from there? But what will they earn from? So a situation is created where all centers start developing production, and a situation arises where all these production centers, which either emerged or will be re-industrialized, collectively produce such an amount of products that no one needs at all. Consequently, as a result of various factors, inflation.
Tariff policy, trade restrictions, inflation trigger a recession that will actually sweep away those centers you're talking about. This is more than likely in the next 1.5 to 2 years. We conducted an analysis on the Leadership Mandate 2025, which is essentially a program. These are, let's say, elements of Trump's program that are not conceptual, says Viktor, but what he is doing today, what has changed today. In this program, they estimate that it will allow the American economy to grow by 4% per year, reduce debt burden, and decrease inflation. They are moving as per this program. But this program does not yet take into account the reactions of opposing countries like China, which impose counter-sanctions, the motivation of other countries to invest in themselves, and essentially to technologize, compete, resist the Americans. And modeling by the end of this year shows that the growth rates of the American economy will not increase, but rather decrease, because the volume of global trade will shrink, triggering a recession. And now the most interesting part, we return to the mandate of full leadership. The main opponent and enemy of America is identified as China, which, as we have partially started to touch upon, is today the leader in the number of patents granted annually. China is the leader in the production of automobiles, metallurgical products, chemical products, electronics, and the list goes on. Today, China is building in various sectors such as infrastructure, technology, and energy.
Already after it, a bunch of...
No, I'm just referring to the case that was most high profile. Let's move on. And today, according to estimates, China will catch up with the Americans in semiconductor technology in just 2 more years. The lovely microelectronics are the pinnacle of technological competition that essentially remained. What is China doing? restricting the supply of critical materials to America. America is trying to restrict the supply of technologies to China. Essentially, in essence, the world is at this critical bifurcation point where China can, in essence, change the course of global history. That's why I believe what Trump is launching today. This can still be returned to a conceptual history. The mandate for leadership is, on one hand, a program. But if you look 2 or 3 steps ahead, it initially triggers elements of a recession in the USA. Look at what Warren Buffett is doing. He has converted the lion's share of assets into cash. He has $300 billion in his account. There have never been such amounts. He is ready for a recession. This is a normal story. The bubbles that were inflated with printed money, they will deflate. Next, trade restrictions caused by the tariffs imposed by Americans against America will lead to a resolution in global trade. Why this lead to? To the fact that Germany, European countries, and China will be limited in their ability to export their products. What are the Americans doing?
Not just their internal debt pyramid has begun.
Can you help me in a minute? Please hold on.
I'm just getting to that point.
The recession triggered by the reduction in global trade and demand for products will lead to a crisis in the economy, in production, and bankruptcy. You've already mentioned the bankruptcy pyramid in Europe and will spread to China. China, which today has crazy structural problems in its economy through insane debt load, through imbalance. The individuals in question possess the necessary attributes or qualities.
Bad loans just in retail.
30% of the youth cannot find a job. There are serious problems there. Thus, America, I'm now returning to a conceptual level. America, their elite surely understands that China, literally within a few years in terms of GDP purchasing power, China is already surpassing America. They can claim global leadership. The projects they launched since 2009, like Greater Eurasia, the creation of a unified Eurasian space, or their involvement in BRICS. Discussed in November, the creation of an international digital currency for international settlements. All of this is aimed, as it were, by BRICS against America. Thus, the initiation of an artificial economic crisis is a prologue to changing the balance of power, which will allow the Americans to assume a new role in the new world. Here, I am actually returning again to the level of concept, and the crisis can put a halt. Certain rates of technological development will decrease, expenses in R&D, in CapEx, and so on, but it will not completely eliminate the competition that has been created. It seems to me that, at the conceptual level, a major war is critically necessary to ensure that the centers of competing power are destroyed and lose their potential for development. What happens next? After initiating this chaos, there arises an opportunity to build a new world order, just as it was done. And after 1945, a new international monetary system was formed, a new security system, the division of the world, and so on. Therefore, we are now only at the beginning of this path, where the mandate for leadership is a small step. What has changed in this mandate? Conditionally, the agreement with Ukraine on critical materials is not specified in this mandate. This is a certain game changer that actually provides an opportunity for Ukraine. I want to ground this concept in Ukraine, which gives us the opportunity to play a little in this game. So far, we are playing very unsuccessfully because we haven't signed the agreement, we haven't agreed.
We stand in solidarity with our friends in Ukraine.
And, well, wait, we still kind of live here, we are here, so we are not a horse in a vacuum, which is somewhere out there in the absence of a global processor. Returning now to the level of concept, the mandate in leadership, Trump's actions, I agree that Trump plays a certain role here. There is a group of people behind him, often referred to as the PayPal Mafia, who were quite actively involved in the election campaign in creating the very mandate for leadership, which was financed by Peter Thiel, who twice funded the company Vensa. And in this case, Trump's task, here the role of personality in history is important, because only such a charismatic leader can break the old system, essentially resist it. He is resisting today and fighting with the deep American state, and Elon Musk is actively helping him here. His task is essentially to be the destroyer of the old system. And what do you agree with here? He is not a builder, but how it will be built depends on the people who will come after Trump. The same Americans we talked to, by the way. Let me remind you what today's broadcast is called.
Sample, scattered clear, empire.
Empire is key here. Just being in America 2 months ago, I recently spoke with the person who is close to Trump's team, and we discussed, listened to quite sharp movements. You have a balance of power, checks and balances, and so on. He says, you don't understand. Today, Trump is an emperor. Trump's entourage calls him an emperor. Therefore, the theme of today's broadcast is directly related. So a kind of empire is being built, which has a term of 2 years until the next elections. And in fact, the deep state, which is essentially the biggest enemy of the current administration today, has the ability to resist for a limited period of time. So they are trying to destroy the foundations of the deep state in order to then, after breaking the old system, build a new one. And here I would probably agree with Viktor that both the sixth technological paradigm and the maximum technologization of the state apparatus, the decision-making system, digital dictatorship applied in China will be used in America, because all existing social networks, large corporations, what we are sitting here discussing, it is being recorded in real time by our gadgets. It is being collected there. AI is being connected. And in this context, Trump is simply a necessary temporary figure who will allow a new system to be built in America, considering that by this time, America's competitors will also lose their position. This has returned to her as a normal concept.
So once again, well, communicating with me is definitely beneficial for you. We agreed with my thought that the empire is delivering a counterstrike, and it's a preemptive one now. Communicating with me, that's a joke. Once again, the United States, that is Gidimu, existing in the global context as a significant entity, does it really want to remain a hegemon or not? Truly, this is a really important thesis. Its closest geopolitical competitor, which indeed has every chance to take the place of the new hegemon in the coming years, not decades, years, is being derailed using the last window of opportunity, indeed. Because in 5, 7 to 10 years, such a window will no longer exist.
Stop!
So we have already agreed on the goals, on goal setting, but we are arguing about the methods.
About the strategic and well-planned path, and comprehensive. The preservation of the influence of the United States in at least a bipolar world depends on whether they will surrender or not their leadership position in technology and economy to the States and China.
Wait, they are not interested in a bipolar world?
What, the States?
Yes.
Well, I don't know. It's hard for me to say about the States, because it's one thing to have concepts from Brzezinski or Kissinger and another from Heritage. Well, there doesn't seem to be a clear strategy right now. America is more like the idea of, in a sense, allocation and distribution of territories. This is not about maintaining leadership in any way. This is simply divide zones of interest. No. I've never heard anything like that about what is called exploitation.
Why really start a wave of crisis?
That's what I'm saying. You know, the tools and goals essentially diverge significantly. Hitting yourself on the head to make things worse for China is indeed quite absurd, in all honesty.
It's not an absurd idea, because things will get worse in different proportions. Yes, because it will get slightly worse for you temporarily for 6 months, but their global things will collapse. You understand?
Necessary. First and foremost, it will get worse for Canada and Mexico. To a large extent, it will get worse for the European Union. And only thirdly, it will get worse for China.
No, it will get worse for everyone simultaneously, and the depth of this worsening will correspond to the ratio of foreign trade to GDP, roughly speaking, and to the part of it that ultimately, in the economic landscape and the global market dynamics as we know it, goes to the American market.
Here's the model of who and how it gets worse. It gets worse for China than for the United States. This modeling is not mine, it's the modeling of Ernst & Young. Mexico suffers a loss from the current scenario in this situation. We don't know what in the future. They will be revising the tariffs. They are already discussing that it doesn't work. We are only talking about the current scenario, about the fact that exists now. So right now, Mexico suffers the most, then Canada, then the States. and China suffers to a lesser extent than, but indeed now there's literally a new strategy with, all right, we played the game, postponed tariffs on all other countries, leaving, however, it's unclear which ones. We leave them on China, engaging with 143% to 100%, playing with technology restrictions and innovation. Was there a boy, perhaps? And as a result, China is able to reorganize in a multitude of sectors and industries at a more rapid pace than the United States of America will. Look, the United States of America now, what will happen? They are escalating internal conflicts and further increasing opposition to what Trump is doing. And he will not carry the strategy through to the end. That is, they will be forced to lower the tension, and China has accepted the challenge, and China is starting to rapidly build up its response. Aircraft carriers in 2020, we can guess that the aircraft carriers in 2020 are not the same as those in 2024. That the development of naval drones and counteraction technologies in 2027 will make them senseless.
And we can speculate perhaps already, I don't know. About 4 years ago, starting with COVID, the Chinese economy is in fact actually declining.
Of course.
Stats inflated.
Of course, it's all inflated.
We suspect that the strategic projects of the mid-2000s, when, look, roads to nowhere, houses for 3 billion people that stand idle, and so on, indeed.
Now, regarding a few words, it's all literally inflated nonsense.
Just an inflated bun. We understand that China maintained the stability of its social system only through an electronic concentration camp and the social credit system it implemented. With this, in the Russian district again and work everywhere now.
They just tighten the screws differently in different provinces. No, not only here. Only Z, specifically speaking, don't look at it that way. As a matter of fact, in this context, for example, there is also certainly quite an effective and notably comprehensive economic policy at the level of this bubble with the UN. There are also definite state corporate investments in technology and artificial intelligence. And there, the real growth rate is significantly higher than in the States. And yes, it all can collapse. There were. No, they weren't. Well, they are now. They are like that now. There, the exponents are significantly steeper. Of course, we are already leaving the Western world behind. Yes, the Western world, in many aspects, most definitely, but not the Trump model of the Western world. I am actually advocating that to weaken China, completely different tools should be used. Yes, protectionist, but synchronized with a large list of countries. That alternatives need to be considered, not playing a game of one against the other or hoping that you can use Russia against China, but that you are playing the India game, playing the Middle East game as alternative projects. That you are certainly drawing the great, Turan into the orbit of your interests and not distancing yourself from them. Afghanistan and everything else.
You can play the big game when you have a long corridor and the ability to go through it, such as when you are prepared. You always can. Eurocan. It's constantly noted in the chats. It's a trademark. Look, you're right. I completely agree with you, provided that America has a large reserve of resilience. From the Federal Reserve, it doesn't go anywhere. Motum prints the money. Well, exactly. Just a second. America inherently has a greater reserve of resilience than everyone else.
A priori. And as long as this system is preserved and how long it will last is unknown, it can afford to make sharp moves. It can afford to cut to the quick because it can manage to cut to the quick.
But one moment. This system of resilience has already been repeatedly subjected to blows and doubts. This is the same Greater Eurasia Project. This is the BRICS attempt to launch an international monetary system. America's strength is the printing press and the dollar as a global currency, which
and the ability to attract Chinese, Indians, Ukrainians to America so that they can work hard.
Today there are manifestations, but nevertheless, America's technological dominance is already being questioned. The dynamics driving the world, technological development shows that in the next 5 years, America will lose the potential it currently has. Research, including that of Fundell and what Mario Draghi has done, and similar studies in America indicate that the potential for growth in labor productivity is absent. A break is needed. A turning point is needed. What needs to happen to start building something new? The old needs to be destroyed. Will you destroy yourself? No, it's easier to destroy everyone else. I agree with Viktor that the margin of safety is such that while the fat dries, the thin will die. And in this model, they launch a new one.
And they are like, life is like that.
But again, from the perspective of playing games in China, India, and other regions, which I wanted to respond to. America doesn't have enough resources today to play the big game because of the debt burden on their soul. Since I need to shed these debts and move into something new, what this new thing will be is actually an open question. Is precisely the answer to the question of what concept to build.
In this regard, working with virtual assets and the legalization of the virtual economy is the way forward, because it is precisely a way to build a bridge between what was and what will be. Further, it is definitely about creating large alliances, not an attempt to indeed build tools of neocolonialism, as with Ukraine.
I actually just believe that it will not go.
And I see that this is indeed destructive for America itself.
Look again at it carefully. This is the fundamental essence of capitalism. In every economic cycle, these strategic alliances you mentioned, they have semi-peripheries and complex peripheries. All these alliances are always an unequal exchange, the center in relation to the periphery. It doesn't work any other way.
So, look, that's exactly the point, that the United States of America in this process, in the new transition, could play the role of a moderator, not the role of a new empire. Why? Because they simply lack the necessary power to effectively and successfully carry this transition on their own. They no longer have enough power. They are no longer Britain.
They cut bones. Once again, they are preparing for the transition.
They can't cut costs at the moment. They don't have sorry, what did they cut? Could you please repeat? Which ones? Well, approximately 1.7 trillion. What did they cut? We know that they can't cut more than 70% of social spending. How are you going to cut that? What did they give? They didn't come up with 100 billion. They didn't come up with 100 billion. That's nothing at all. It's truly a naive thought indeed that they will recover 700 billion or however much.
In the last 100 years, there have been several manipulations with the dollar. There was a unilateral abandonment of the gold standard.
Give me a joint. This is new tea. This is a marriage. Come on. This is different.
Doesn't it seem to you that we are on the verge of approaching some Rubicon, maybe in a couple of years, when a new type of assets of a conditional digital nature will appear? So we are talking, look, indeed, digital nature. This means that debts will be forcibly given to the new ones. It's impossible to reset in any other way. This is what I'm talking about. Formally, it won't be a scam, but in essence, it will be a scam. But this will reset the debts.
This is indeed new. Embarking on a new path signifies a journey filled with exploration and discovery, offering numerous opportunities and challenges that lead to personal growth and transformation.
As Bill Gates indeed talked about. COVID, he says, there will be many similar epidemics, and they create conditions for people to stay at home. This is the answer to why digital assets are needed. People will simply transition to virtual assets.
Right now, people are very needed. Later, they won't be needed. Indeed, 80% on the outskirts, only 20% in the ecumene. We've all read these, described it, everything is clear here. The question is different. When you are in your role as a dominant force, you can smoothly and efficiently facilitate the transition. You can create this transition through your power, like when you are not a dominator in life, when you are in various situations or in your career or in your personal endeavors, your being is based on the trust and understanding you have created within a theoretical and hypothetical circle of the first ally, where they are not colonies, but theoretically equal to you, not in scale, but in the logic of existence. And indeed, there is a periphery that you have hooked onto yourself, but again, through trust. You made everyone believe in your stock market, in your economy, in the demand on your market, and security and all of that, and everything else. Security and stability, and this established a system. Now you are cutting off all these paths, all of it. And effectively, if you were a dominator, you wouldn't care about the reaction or response from everyone else. But here, the game is of a completely different nature. It gets lost in the wilderness.
Times, all the times. And in the 19th century, Britain, and then in the 20th century, the United States, it all happened very cynically. Opium supplies were a response from the British Empire, so to speak, to the negative trade balance, which was primarily total domination. Alternatives.
I don't understand.
Look, the United States of America undoubtedly became a hegemon significantly thanks to the two world wars in Europe. Thanks to the two world wars.
At this moment, I must intervene as a historian. I prepared a note in detail, I understand it, and with care, I prepared it. I made a note 5 minutes ago, seeing where the conversation is going. So here's the little note. Achtung. The protectionist impulse of key powers, the powers after the Great Depression of 1929. Let's guess who did what? The USA. Were the first to introduce strict protectionist measures with the adoption of the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930, raising import duties on more than 20,000 goods to record levels of about 45–50%.
At that time, the United States, by that point in time, already had the most powerful economy in the world at that period compared to...
The goal was to protect American farmers and manufacturers from foreign competition. The result provoked retaliatory measures from other countries and led to a reduction in global trade volume by approximately 65% to the level of 1933.
And that indeed we call make depression great again.
That's it. Which was a hegemon, was already ending its influence and power, its hegemony in global affairs after World War I. What is hegemony? The abandonment of the gold standard in 1931, which led to a 30% devaluation of the pound. The Import Duties Act in 1932, introducing a 10% tariff on most imported goods. The creation of the imperial preferential system at the Ottawa Conference in 1932, preferential trade agreements between Britain and its dominions Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. We will see all of this now, by the way, in a similar format. France, the introduction of import duties on a wide range of goods. Tightening of customs duties on industrial and agricultural goods. Abandonment of the gold standard later than others in 1936, which prolonged the economic crisis. Created a trade bloc with its colonies to protect the domestic market, Germany, indeed. Implemented strict currency control from 1931 to 1933, the new plan of 1934. Yalmar, this was when Hitler came to power. The creation of bilateral trade agreements, especially with Balkan and Latin American countries. Autarky, economic self-sufficiency, a program of the Nazi government to ensure economic independence, which I would add led to a budgetary crisis at the end of 1937, which forced them to invade and annex Austria at the beginning of 1938, providing resources to last through 1938, but then the same situation arose, and the same mess, and the global foreign trade space, the trade system aimed at ensuring Germany's with a series of export markets. Italy, politics, the battle for grain, the pursuit of self-sufficiency and wheat production. Autarky, political and economic self-sufficiency under Mussolini's regime. Introduction of high import tariffs, blah, blah, blah. State regulation of the economy through a corporate system. Japan, expansion into Manchuria and China to ensure access to a series of markets. Planned economy, militarization of industry, currency control, import substitution of imports, SSR. Everything is clear. Forced industrialization, collectivization, almost complete state monopoly on foreign trade in pursuit of economic authority, consequences of protectionism, reduction of world trade by 65% between 1929 and 1933, formation of closed trade blocs, sterling area, franc zone, German economic space, increased economic tension between powers which contributed to political confrontation, slowing down the recovery of the world economy after the crisis. This wave of protectionism began to weaken only after World War II and the creation of the Bretton Woods system and GATT, predecessors of this, which were developed as a method for preventing the recurrence of the destructive trade wars of the 1930s.
Here's just one interesting story from this period. South Korea. The Republic of Korea played meteorological games, thanks to which it indeed gained a 20-year sport. But indeed, this is absolutely the only exception during this period.
So comparative theories, i.e. theories such as comparative advantages, etc., and so on. All the countries that achieved success always had either hidden mechanisms there, targeted subsidies, and in various ways in their economic strategies. Listen, I understand. Yes, indeed. Also, such tariffs, such as, this is part of the question. This is part of the question. Countries that had maybe even non-tariff restrictions, because Korea has large conglomerates such as chaebols, and Japan has business groups like Keiretsu, respectively. You might not have formal tariffs, but you have several financial industrial groups, so to speak, that
The market, and now it's practically impossible to enter with a food product. The associations there operate so powerfully that they simply won't let you into certain markets. There, it's all clear that the question is always about the degree. The degree of government intervention, the degree of economic nationalism, or the degree of structuralism. In short, the degree is very precisely determined by national policy. That's what the WTO is for. That's what free trade zones are indeed, essentially, and primarily for, in essence, they are tools when countries agree on bilateral or customs unions or economic unions. Why are they developing? Because it turns out that if you have essentially the same policy, similar policy, the same view on third countries, that you have the same goals, these development goals of human capital, welfare, well-being, economic growth, innovations indeed agree with this, then it is more beneficial for you to trade within your structure. It is more beneficial to trade without restrictions. But in relation to third countries, yes, you need to build your defense. This applies to both politics and economics.
within your structure, you need a minimum market capacity. There is such a concept. In fact, there are several key laws, just a few, everything else from Lookout, that work in large systems. 500 million people is at the very least the required market capacity.
Sorry, no, 500 million people in the European Union, so much.
Wait, no, just a little bit, hold on.
Wait.
In Europe, several more countries, in 99% of industries as of today, with the current levels of technological development and depth of labor division in the world, 500 million people is a sufficient market, meaning for approximately 99%, let's say, of the product line.
Listen, this is very strange. That's exactly the point. In the context of an economics doctorate, I don't like this logic. I disagree.
For a minute, that's the point of the European Union's existence, roughly speaking. 500 million people, that was the point of NAFTA's existence. Because the US is a small market, well, it doesn't quite reach. You need Mexico and Canada, so to speak. India and China are both self-sufficient markets. The exception, this 1%, is integrated circuits at 5 nanometers, which is a very small scale and is used in advanced technology. You have the minimum necessary market capacity there, for example, 2.5 billion. Well, in order to, that's why there are 2.5 companies in the whole world that work on it.
Years of numbers. I don't understand why they are needed, but they are just being forced. There's no such thing. To develop the textile industry, you need to have a market of 500 million.
Again, well, look, after World War II, all countries that had around 40, 50 million, such as, for instance, had a national automotive industry because it was the depth of the division of labor with that technological setup and a sufficient market for those investments to pay off, so to speak. So look, in order to remain a hegemon, to continue to remain a hegemon and maintain its position as a hegemon, if you have, as you may know, more favorable proportions, first of all, you have on your territory the Federal Reserve System, meaning the lender of last resort for the global economy. Your ratio of foreign trade to GDP is relatively small, not 50-60 like in exporting countries, but 10 to 15. Accordingly, if you start cutting into the living, breaking existing supply chains with prohibitive tariffs, it significantly hits your exported competitors much harder than it does you, much more painfully. So if you think strategically, and not about green grass and blue skies and world peace, then at any cost, I emphasize, at any cost, you try to remain as the hegemon and reboot. In a new long cycle of capital accumulation on a new industrial base, and start building an argument for yourself, so that these assembly points are on your territory, then they are doing absolutely the right thing from the point of view of...
First of all, who are they? And secondly, what are they doing? They maintain, yes, okay, in your logic, 500 million or not 500 million. In fact, they are more because they still sweep up South America as a zone of influence and maintain a zone of influence in some other regions, like conditionally the Middle East, very conditionally. And maybe they will even negotiate with some alternate... well, wait. There's also Australia and New Zealand, yes, remaining in the zone of interest. and simply wait out everything that happens outside. But how will you wait it out if in all this your own markets do not depend on Latin America, but depend on Asia, if your industrial cycles depend on Europe, if you yourself you lack the technologies to cover everything necessary, you lack chemistry, you lack components, you lack materials such as rare earth elements. You can't extract everything in Bolivia, in Argentina. You can extract lithium there, but everything else. Extract from Ukraine? Well, sorry, those are projects for 10 years. In order to prepare for
The logic about resources and the logic about deep processing products, they are different.
But you are indeed playing one game, and you must currently shape this policy effectively.
You took, which means you hit 180 countries, 70 of which returned to you within 2 to 3 days, saying, guys, wait, let's kind of talk and discuss our new living conditions. So, we understand your concerns. Yes, we understand that the balance between us is not in your favor. Let's do it this way.
They came to formally talk, and at the same time they went to talk in the same way with China, Japan, the Saudis, the Turks, and the European Union. Guys, how are we going to live now that we have lunatics in the house? In the same way they went to talk with Brazil, in the same way they went to talk with BlackRock, which is formally buying ports, 40 or how many already, 80 ports around the world in the interests of how the Trump administration. But what does Trump have to do with it? This is really a bluff. As if a private pound, what interest will work further? That's a big, big question. And most importantly, what I want to get to. Behind all this, you are trying to attribute, forgive me for saying this, but as it seems to me, to attribute to the Trump administration, or rather to him personally and some part of his entourage, a strategic game. That's what I see in it. A slightly bigger sandwich. I see that at the core, the conceptualists, the techno-oligarchs are perfectly fine with more chaos, more breaking. Where else could you indulge, perhaps, so you could break something else there? And a tactical game at the level of short rounds, like preference. Deal, observe, oh, well, it didn't work out, right?
And earn along the way. However, no, all of this was watched.
But you say this is the middle of the strategy level. I don't see it. I see a tactical level. I see a conceptual level. The conceptualists do not deviate from their strategy. Why? Because it's been high from the start. They wait until these ones mess around, and then they present themselves on these ruins of self-rule. They write articles and...
Well, you know, they exist.
Of course, I'm for them. I bet on them. I absolutely do not, under any circumstances, bet on the tip of the iceberg in any way whatsoever on Besset's, or even remotely consider betting on that economist they took. This is just some kind of trash. You justify that trash on 4 levels more intellectually.
Yes, because look, Navarro didn't answer one simple question. If you indeed impose tariffs against all these countries, some of which actually finance your debts, and if you force them, as you say, to agree, to say, yes, we, like Nissan, we will move production, bring one plant, the one in Arizona, somewhere there, to start it so that American workers can work, and the trade balance of the United States improves, and immediately, in general, the question arises by constantly purchasing U.S. Treasury bonds and having already bought more than $1 trillion worth, will you have the resources, because you had a surplus, to continue purchasing these Treasury bonds and continue supporting them? No, not. No, of course not. This logic in general applies to all things.
In terms of debt structure, 24% of the holders of federal government debt are foreign investors. 76% are domestic American public entities. So what? Listen, please, once again, that's just it. All the victims of the United States, in brackets enemies, will simultaneously dump the debt securities on the market. Their value will drop to 0.7 of the nominal. At 0.7, the money owners will buy them up, and that will be the end of it. And you won't crash anything.
Once again,
So I start to depreciate. Wait, don't get confused.
I start to depreciate. The cost of servicing the securities starts to rise because they have increased from 3.90 to 4.5%. You understand? And therefore, before that, transition begins, or rather it has already started, but before it enters the phase after which the rise begins, a lot can be done.
Look, I'm predicting by the end of April, I am absolutely convinced that another 2.5 to 3 weeks of this kind of chaos, and certainly your theory of some random and unplanned events, the markets will all be red.
No, please. It's planned, chaos planned by conceptualists, that there should be chaos.
Look, the markets will be red. They don't have a direct influence on the Fed. You correctly noted, indeed, the decision-making system is entirely...
Holds significantly more debt than foreigners in total.
Of course. 76% are domestic American entities, among them probably the Feds.
About 30% are with foreigners. The Fed has 5 trillion. It needs to be calculated more precisely, but somewhere around half.
In short, yes indeed, but don't forget, this is a fractional reserve system. Because when the Fed conducts a reverse repurchase, the Fed conditionally creates money, injects it into the system, buys central government debt, and the banking system itself also creates second part of money. If, for example, during COVID, on the Fed's balance sheet, I think they printed about 4 or 5 trillion, right? 6, maybe 6 and 17 appeared in the system. So another 11 was generated by the fractional reserve banking system, secondary issuance, as it's called. That's why it works. Yes, these are communicating vessels. There might be some sagging, but causing critical damage that would collapse the US system is impossible. But causing critical damage to China, which would disorganize it, is possible. And they are doing it. And from a tactical level perspective, I haven't finished my predictions. In May, the Federal Reserve will lower the key rate, for example, to 0.5 or 0.25. For now, there are still currently 3 weeks of turmoil, and the issue will not be inflation, but stagnation. The Federal Reserve will lower the rate, successfully refinancing 9 trillion in June for $200 billion. Instead of $1,200 billion. This means that the tactical issues of the current gap will be resolved. So somewhere around September, the first jurisdiction to begin economic growth, and a stable one at that, will be the USA. And the European trade zone, China, will step back for 2 to 3 years. What happens next? Hard to predict. And this tactical level game is still their game, and it will definitely be successful. Because there are no other options. Accompanied by, look, as you can see, this will indeed be different. I agree with you that certain internal forces indeed might not allow them, and certain factors potentially might influence the situation further. That is, in other words, the temperature in the pot will rise so much, significantly and extremely, so to speak, that it will be necessary, in order to effectively manage and control this excess of energy, to slow down or channel this energy appropriately, for example, with Trump's impeachment. Solve all tropical strategic level issues indeed with Trump's impeachment. Then after the arrival of Emperor Wendy, you will understand what techno-fascism really is, and then the conceptualists will emerge.
We know that this is a catastrophic scenario that we are waiting for, and that we actually like.
Escaped, the world will be watching, and, well, when are you going to resolve it already? We are indeed living too. Our economies are significantly collapsing here. Our balance of payments and trade balance are worsening. People are starting to go hungry.
Is it worsening? It starts to approach zero. It stops being positive in relation to the USA.
Look, physically, it can't happen. It can't happen in a physical sense, in any conceivable way, in the near future. There is China. The United States can theoretically refuse to buy goods. That is, in certain situations, impose such prohibitive tariffs that...
Percent isn't enough for you in relation to China. Approximately a 500 billion somersault for us.
They have been brought into the picture. But this is still a game of raising the stakes in the context of this situation. China will definitely look for countermeasures. Now, I'll tell you for sure, I definitely have all the numbers here. While you're looking at the numbers, not 500, well, yes. I'm talking about the hidden ones, 50 plus the Mexican 50, approximately.
I like the topic that Vitya touched on, but which we haven't explored yet. Indeed, this global conceptual game that is being launched can break on two things. First, the insane resistance of America's deep state, which Musk was clearing out, and second, through the impoverishment of people. The launch of a trade war can lead to inflation growth through the increase in the cost of purchased products. This will lead not to a decrease, but to an increase in the Fed's rate. As we know, in America, loans are tied to the Fed's rate. The rise in mortgage loan costs means hundreds of thousands of homeless. The rise in interest rates means the impossibility of repaying student loans. This complicates access to capital for private corporations and consequently accelerates the recession of the American economy. How do Americans react? In fact, we have all interacted with American politicians. They rely not on global and conceptual matters, but on the opinions of their constituents from their district. And impoverished Americans will actually say, listen, we don't care about something in the world.
More dependent on television, on parents.
In this case, these very congressmen and senators can instigate an internal revolution, a dark one for Trump. This, by the way, is what will limit this conceptual story. It seems that the king is naked. Wait, here is your Mensa. But this could be part of the plan, to use a personality in history to destroy the old system, then discard him or say, now we will build our new world. Those who were nobody will become somebody.
Let me explain to you. Look, in simple terms and elaborating in detail about the economic theory of the neoliberal Dligach, there is demand-pull inflation. And we, the conservative protectionists, have two types of inflation: demand pull and cost push. So indeed, Trump and his team are working with cost push factors. Drill, baby, drill. Just hold on, look. And other solutions in various ways they, to some extent, dampen.
They did not reduce the cost, they increased it, both in 2018 and now as well. Costs in the States are rising because the cost of labor is increasing significantly. Energy prices have decreased, but components have become more expensive. Everything you assemble depends on imports, and imports are becoming more expensive. What did the Chinese expect in the first iteration? They would raise the tariff, and the Chinese, to maintain their market position, would lower prices. The Chinese raise prices. You understand? Watch closely. They slightly raise prices. The cost is increasing.
Just like in China.
They are already holding their heads. It was like this. American car manufacturers rushed in, pleading.
Look, with 145% tariffs, China currently has no options left because tactically it can balance itself by devaluing the yuan. As a result, at the present moment, it is crucial to consider all strategic moves. Well, so what is he?
He will definitely do it. I'm sure he will definitely do it.
So, look, once again, you see the story is quite straightforward and simple. I think everyone agreed on where he went. I think everyone agreed that if we fully and correctly understand the conceptual framework, we are, in essence, correctly saying that the hegemon wants to preserve itself, reboot, and become even more influential. A potentially new emerging hegemon in the next approximately 70-year cycle. And its goal setting is such that its window of opportunity is small in terms of resources. And it needs to undertake extraordinary measures. True, but not like these. That is, once again, conceptually, look, conceptually we have almost justified it, right? We have essentially and practically justified it because survival is the primary collective instinct of a social system. The question is tactical. Are certain measures effective or less effective? Or, for example, it's a chain of measures. It's a measure, countermeasure, counteragent. Again, a countermeasure, the next countermeasure. We will see this picture, perhaps, I don't know, by the end of summer in the coming months. After the June refinancing by the end of summer somewhere, It will finally take shape. We will understand how these clusters have divided, who are friends, who are not friends, who is on that side of the market, who is on this side of the market, and they will start forming.
Right. Friends will be conditional after these actions. All friends will be situational, conditional, and everyone will be building a strategy of counteraction.
And for now, regarding the plan that is working, additional data has come to light. You introduce this chart. Look at this chart. On this chart, see how US government spending has increased since Trump came into office. It increased by $154 billion. And even all the work of this mask did not help at all.
I already said that what they are doing is absolutely and completely senseless. If there is definitely an alternative, I would talk about it. From my point of view, there is, firstly,
to maintain their hegemony.
Yes, to maintain hegemony. A hegemon is someone who is recognized as a hegemon. And when you're, a bodybuilder in the gym, you come in, show off your muscles, can take on anyone, and then the guys gather, hit you on the head with a dumbbell, and you lie there with your tongue out. This is the picture that is unfolding now. You're no longer the biggest bodybuilder. Everyone else has bulked up. There are all sorts of different guys. Some do kung fu. That's why they are launching a wave of strategy disruption. You try to break everything here, and they tell you, well, damn, here's a different question. Just, what could you have done? You could have said, guys, there's a new cool gym nearby. Who's with me? A new cool gym. No, here it's a virtual economy, new principles of building international trade, a new concept of civilians.
The competitor is building a new one across the street.
Building, and you invite and build. Instead of saying, don't go to him, don't go to BRICS, don't be friends with him, or else I'll give you a hard time. Instead, you start offering another project that is more attractive. Because that project is unpleasant, people are afraid of it. Everyone knows, don't form ties with China. China builds Chinese in 3 hours.
I'll let you in on a little secret. All hegemons were central hubs of power and had colonies in various regions extending to the periphery and non-equivalent exchange and influence. Then it couldn't have been any other way. And all the wealth of the hegemons was always financed by the periphery.
It's over. Look, this story is already over.
The dominance has come to an end, of such kind. The forms have changed. Because before, you needed to have a military contingent, say in India, in order to extract from it, over 200 years, $57 trillion in today's prices, I believe. They extracted about 30 trillion, not 57, but more. Now these are subtle points. And when we move to the next paradigm, to the human-machine interface, when even in the freedom of thought, you will no longer be alone with yourself, just in a dark room. Do you understand? And we are moving away from capitalism to something else entirely. Look, like this.
Look, we are converging.
Half a second, look. Any system is primarily characterized by the object of appropriation. In the global system, the object of appropriation was the body of the slave. In feudalism, it was the fief, the land. In capitalism, it is the surplus value created. You create a system that is formally free, but it is
not quite like that. There is appropriation of different resources.
And we are moving into a fundamental story. This is no longer capitalism. This is post-capitalism, where the object of appropriation will be free will.
Not quite like that. The model can be different. We have considered about a dozen models of post-capitalism. From the model of interest, enthusiasm, curiosity to models conditionally, likes, and similar things. Yes, of course, your brain, which becomes an exploitable resource as a result of technological advancements in various fields and industries, is not particularly needed, which is quite concerning. Not needed. During the transitional period between traditional capitalism and post-capitalism, yes, it is needed, it is involved. Later, even physically, the physical person is not particularly needed. What can be taken from it? Money, well, especially old money, is not really needed. For you to support something not essential, what's needed is with cyberocracy. You are not really needed at all. You just need to be completely isolated from any influence, from any manifestations of necessity. You need to be pushed aside. Ready-made content, ready-made food, unconditional basic goods, that's your territory. And those very 10, 20% who will genuinely want to develop, be genuinely interested in something, innovate and create, for whom artificial intelligence will not be a way to avoid work, but a tool. For example, for a certain transitional period of time, they will indeed be the creators of their own space of existence. This is the most important thing in post-capitalism, which will distinguish it from previous economies. It's an exchange that will not be needed. There is no need for a measure of this exchange. There is no need for that very money that is supposed to measure something. This is an economy of a different level. It's an economy of giving, gifting, transferring, an economy of joy, a different economy. But we still need to live to see this concept. It has not been presented. There is no leadership regarding this concept. There are only questions for now. Let's create an interim solution. Let's maintain the general logic of the economy and capitalism, just push it into the virtual world and call it post-capitalism. No, in reality, it's all just packaged a little differently. And there I see a task there is a proposal for. This is the concept of transitioning from the techno-oligarch. We are observing it. Let's return to the main question we are discussing today. Is it an effective tool for maintaining hegemony? Not at all for transition. It is not a tool for transition. The transition will have new tools. But maintaining hegemony, I say no, actually. And when you were a hegemon that truly held dominance over in history, the global economy, global trade, global financial markets, you could afford such games. Now you are no longer a hegemon. You have 20%, 23%. That's it. You've lost hegemony.
The Queen granted pirates the titles of lords.
Yes.
They plundered and exploited everyone around the world. They are the inventors and creators of the entire broad and extensive range of the most cruel and inhumane technologies, starting with concentration camps. This wasn't indeed Adolf Schicklgruber, actually known as the person famously referred to as Brella, in the region of, this was invented by the British long before, and so on. They did this first at the beginning with strict protectionism. First, trade acts, initially depriving all their colonies of any autonomy for producing products of deep processing and so on. This came first, then a global empire, and then the propaganda of freedom and justice. The United States also did the same.
Completely. Now President Zelensky is currently sitting in the Oval Office alongside two other presidents, the current and the future leaders of nations, in one office together for a significant discussion on important matters that concern all parties involved. The colony rebelled.
Returned after just 5 days.
What to ask for? Asked by other guys, what is perhaps their logic? Wait, don't rush. We see everything. We understand everything. He must bury himself. Give him the chance to bury himself. Don't get worked up. You're just very young and hot-headed. There is a plan. I don't know this plan. I see the manifestation of this plan or the intention to create it. Behind the actions of the British and the European Union is ultimately the search for such a concept. They have in totality for all of them, both the Commonwealth and the European Union as a whole. Well, this is in relation to Ukraine, against the state. Yes, this is an unpleasant plan. It's unpleasant. But nevertheless, in some mysterious way, it also gives us the opportunity to be part of this process. Yes, we can raise the stakes. Yes, we can definitely get better conditions. But for now, yes, I agree with you. I'm coming back. I am sure there will be resistance. That they will be like mice, the Vietnamese will run like mice, because what? Did the Chinese say? Run, negotiate. No, because they want to play their own game. Why, despite all this, didn't the Japanese rush to negotiate? The South Koreans didn't rush to negotiate. They have one of the worst. Taiwan didn't rush to negotiate. Taiwan has the worst conditions. Looking at all the parameters, Taiwan has been presented with...
Taiwan has tripled its LNG gas purchases.
I am indeed absolutely sure that a residue will remain. These actions will not lead to strengthened hegemony, but rather to everyone adopting a medium-term strategy over 2 to 3 years to minimize dependence.
Look, in this context, I advise everyone who is watching now to watch our interview, my interview with Serhiy Kosunsky, who is today the last day as the ambassador of Ukraine in Japan. Absolutely, in my opinion, a brilliant conversation with a professional who has been in diplomacy for 30 years. He covered exactly these issues regarding the reaction of Asia, East Asia, Korea, Japan, and other countries to everything that is happening. And he said the following, that they would seriously consider the necessity of other forms of regional and global alliances. And essentially, the game begins to, in a way that is somewhat similar to, in a manner that sort of start doing this. Note that in the very first days, a meeting took place in Tokyo between representatives of China, Korea, and Japan.
For the first time in many years, they have united like this.
What contradictions exist between Japan and China, Japan and the Koreans, who, despite trading with each other, have sharp disagreements. Then Xi Jinping made a statement to the European Union today suggesting to start playing. There is China, it is steadily keeping pace, trying to maintain the pace in the global arena because it largely appears as a constructive force against the backdrop of the Americans. He says, we need to preserve the liberal order, which kind of, from the communist leaders, they say, we need to preserve the liberal order because it satisfies us. Korsunsky said a very important and impactful thing in his speech. He said the following, that Asian countries have been cutting each other for so long, and there were such sharp contradictions, and they couldn't create something similar to the European Union in the western part of Eurasia. And therefore this situation, this world order, where the states guaranteed security and there were clear rules and they all adapted to these rules, they are very even satisfied them because they stopped fighting each other and a movement towards prosperity began. And now all of this is certainly and indeed being absolutely undermined there. And I completely agree with Andrey here that now the states have undermined the stability of dozens of countries. And we're not talking about the wealthiest because they have more resilience. They have their own central banks. They have a diverse economy. But take, for example, a country like Mauritius. It has found itself in a complete mess today because they have only 1 or 2 products they can sell, agricultural ones as a rule. And now these countries have no way to compensate for what's happening. And this will undoubtedly cause destabilization for them because without access to these markets, they cannot withstand and they will face challenges.
Congratulations. What Vitya wants to say
is that they will make agreements with everyone.
I want to say that they have undoubtedly undermined them. They simply undermined them. They first nurtured them 50, 40, 30 years ago. Let's start with the fact that the center of the economic miracle from West Germany to Japan in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was not located in these countries.
This is indeed for themselves. They grew it for themselves.
They developed it for their Western system, which was a logic of confrontation conditionally against the Soviet blocs. And within their system of Western division of labor, they took these markets. On the periphery, they set up successful and RIF. I grew it just for myself.
Not because they were abandoned by the state.
Because that paradigm and that access to the market, the conditions in which they existed then, allowed them to devalue the yen, allowed them to occupy that niche in the American market. I say these are interconnected things. Toyota, Nissan, and everything else. And Detroit. These are interconnected things. So this is indeed a necessity. In the early 90s, it simply ceased to exist. And Japan remained in that structure from 30 years ago. It was the second largest economy in the world.
You might say that Japan is a decaying country. Well, really listen to Sergei's interview. Sergei gives a lecture on Japan to my students every year. We see this dynamic and it is sad. Why? They don't update their technology. Why? Because everything is perfectly fine for them. I'm astonishingly surprised that in this modern era, we still incredibly measure the welfare of a nation primarily by GDP or gross domestic product. All right? It's absolute nonsense when you look at a Japanese person who is an individual with complete freedom and unrestricted access to virtually anything they desire.
The core of the European economic bloc, which is Germany, the most successful federal state, Bavaria. I often visit Munich. We work with Bavaria. We have a project there on green hydrogen. No, I don't look at it from the perspective of GDP. I look at this story comprehensively. Look, wild people. Wild people.
Indeed.
I'm not even talking about simple inconveniences. It takes a year to get married, 3 to get divorced. Look, paper bills delivered by mail.
Ukraine is indeed a way for them. Ukraine is
Debureaucratization. Yes, starting from such small, purely everyday inconveniences to the devastation that is in the minds of the leaders of Bavarian and German business.
And what exactly is this thought you left?
I completely lost track. I need to go back to the consultant. Going to real plans and a saving stick regarding the real relocation of these productions there in the USA. Absolutely no nonsense.
Wait, for whom now?
Well, for them.
For the Germans?
Yes, for the Germans.
Firstly, in the States, there's the same backwardness, if not as well. You won't find people who would work that, well, you know, Ukrainians who are in the States, according to our calculations, Ukrainians, attention, the number. Ukrainians have generated GDP in the United States of America twice as much as in Ukraine. Ukrainians in the States, but in terms of numbers, there aren't 10 million Ukrainians there, but a million.
And 400 billion on GDP?
Yes. They generated approximately 400 billion in IT.
Well, that's through GDP per capita. It's just calculated. It's a different economic structure. Colleagues, the Trump empire is ending.
Dennis, look, Delinsky wrote, he's watching.
Dennis?
Yes. Hello, Dennis. He's watching Romanenko's shorts. He's writing rates will start to decrease in May and markets will grow significantly. There's a liquidity injection, weeks of turbulence, and then a turnaround. All the indicators are there. Person. The cost of energy resources affects inflation more than tariffs. New trade agreements will be signed with China, including a very large mutual dependency. China is increasing liquidity and devaluing the yuan. Third time for the very smart, already calculating GDP percentages. Then he says the state will lower rates and refinance the debt at 0%. Agreeing with everyone, analysis shows strong economic growth in the fall.
Fifth time smart person.
Okay, now I'm looking. And it's a fantasy that he sent someone. They played on his emotions. He was surprised, giving it to the service.
Once a smart person. Is he your friend?
Yes.
Take him with you next time.
Don't look. Wait. We went into cash and are waiting. Also add, this is my remote company.
Bezos did it even earlier.
Without embellishment. I'm just investing based on the facts. By the way, you didn't have Andrey Maslechin. No, I think yes. So first, just a second. Of course, there will be a turnaround, of course, growth, and of course it will make everyone will agree. Because such fear which scares everyone, forces everyone to find a way to agree. And the first to start negotiating will be Trump, and we see that, because he is also a little scared of the effect. Now, will this be the end of the story? Perhaps. Growth? No, it's actually a very short game. There will be an economic catastrophe. It will happen. By the way, just to clarify, I am against the military scenario. The military scenario was needed when we could never lose.
We couldn't play. That's the devil. I think that war is unavoidable.
I definitely think so too. Absolutely hot. It was necessary when there was no possibility to lose everything personally. Now, this war will happen as a format of raising stakes and release.
That's what right now.
That a bomb has landed, consider that it will solve nothing. War always serves one main function. It utilizes the infrastructure of the old order.
Yes? Look, it would be great if everyone didn't see how it works now. In the current situation at this moment, as you can see, how it works now. How it works now. Yes, all these old tank reserves and old infrastructure, it removes. But actually, there's no need to do that. No need. Because you can dispose of all this in another way. Why? Because you can move to another world where there's nothing at all there. Don't need to dispose anything. We had to clear the area because we remained in the physical world with each transition. Now we are moving to where it's not necessary.
Andrey, here I am against you, against your position. I will say that 8 billion people do not know that there is, in fact, a wonderful virtual world where all this is unnecessary. And these people determine and have a crucial and decisive influence on the significant policies of their states.
The war will be in a different format. It won't be a hot war for everyone. It won't be a hot war, everyone against me.
There will be a chain of regional conflicts, primarily bathhouse ones. It's happening.
A hybrid war is also underway. The level of contradictions and the level of competition for critical resources of the new treasure will become so acute that a hot phase is inevitable. This is my deep conviction.
The 27th in my scenario. The 27th scenarios. Our scenario looks as follows. The war is ongoing, it will intensify, its main phase will be in a hybrid format, not in a hot one, in a hot format. It will not be a confrontation of the global world against the global world. It will be essentially a war played out, just like the current economic war is being played out. Comrades, on the stock screens, it will be red, green, it will be fear. This war will be described by the Financial Times and it will be recognized as a war. Meanwhile, actual sea drones will indeed sink a couple of ships. Missiles will arrive, many missiles will arrive. The stock will be depleted. How many? 80 Patriots in Taiwan. They will deplete the missile stock, and at that moment, everyone will come to an agreement. And this agreement will be more diplomatic, political, rather than military. It will not be an amphibious landing. It will be recognition.
We have said everything. It won't be long to wait. We will verify this. Where are Russia and Ukraine? Where are we already in the short term?
Can I at least show one pleasant slide? We indeed have something fresh. We calculated, in short, we calculated $1 trillion. Can you please open the slide for me right now? The slide after the vectors, like, which one is it, damn? Which number is it for me? The 11th day. The 11th. Can you? Yes. Ukraine is reaching $1 trillion GDP by 2035, Dasha, considering global crisis scenarios. Although the only thing left is under the condition of not having a double, not a dual procedure. Moreover, there's approximately a deflator of about 2 to 3% of the dollar.
How does all this exactly affect the Russian Federation's ability to continue the war in any significant way?
The opportunity, once promising and full of potential, has now been exhausted due to the gradual depletion of resources. Over time, these resources have been consumed faster than they could be replenished, leading to scarcity. This situation compels us to seek new solutions and innovations to address the challenges posed by this depletion.
We didn't model together with Andrey, but our numbers match. Over the weekend, I was waiting for the broadcast this week. And over the weekend, I just read Russian statistics from a source I trust, according to the news. Yes, just look, a few simple snapshots that just characterize the situation. From December to March, the gold in the National Wealth Fund decreased by 40%. Now it's only 168 tons. Only about 3.5 trillion rubles of liquid assets remain. It includes approximately 168 tons of gold, roughly $22 billion worth of yuan at the current exchange rate, and some other small amounts.
Only Sonia, by the way, will play about...
Look. In other words, essentially, basically nothing. Look, for the Russian Federation, which is waging a war costing $1 billion a day, this is already nothing. Yes, they need, the figure is roughly $1 trillion a month. No, the second figure, hold on, look, the second figure. For January, February. So the official statistics for the federal budget deficit is 2.5 trillion rubles. Look, officially, the real figure is 3.8. listen, well, look, the real figure is 3.8. They went as far as to allocate part of March's income within the first quarter, well, to record it conditionally for the first 2 months because there is data on them, complete statistics, i.e. the real figure is 1.5 times more than the official one. And the federal budget revenues are equal to the deficit, i.e. to the expenses, the deficit. And approximately a 3.8 deficit over 2 months. And 3.5, we just said, is the liquid assets of the National Wealth Fund. Look, the third figure over there. The budget rule is $60 per barrel, meaning conditionally, if it's above, it's for the National Wealth Fund, if below, to finance the current budget. Fourth, it definitely didn't falter. $60. $60. This year they have, wait. This year it's 60, just don't forget. With partial sanctions, the shadow fleet and all that, depending on the price in the market, they have up to $18 per barrel. That's the delta that shouldn't, and considering various factors such as transportation and logistics and other related expenses.
Even the income, not all of it goes to the budget. There's a part of that. We calculated that it's 55. It turns out to be 55.
I'm talking about in detail taking into consideration how the oil has collapsed. And minus the delta, are you talking about 64 euros?
Yes, the budget includes $70 per barrel.
No, it's included in the budget. That's no, 60 according to the budget rule. $60 according to the budget rule. Look, right now, there's already approximately $12 per barrel they have to add. But look, you know, this rule, they actually... look, as we all know, the conclusion is, unfortunately, there's no money for war. There's no money for war in April, not in November.
Look, it's not quite like that. First, most of the military expenses are in rubles. What are they doing? If last year they financed military orders by 80%, now they simply don't pay them. In fact, accordingly, they are now pulling as much as possible on armaments internally. People, you can say absolutely anything you want in any situation. You can maintain any exchange rate you like. You can pay any amount in rubles. This is stuck. They managed to do it before the large-scale one started. They don't have that money. So what are they doing now with the foreign currency revenue? They still have metals that they export. They still have the robbery that they are squeezing out. And yes, I am absolutely sure, definitely by September or October, this opportunity will end. Their logistics for parallel imports have increased by 30%.
The RZD program has been reduced by 40%.
The cost of credits and expenses dying, but we need to hold out a bit longer, they do. Our resilience in the absence of military supplies from the United States is the ability of the European Union not to sell us 5 billion, but to finance us for military purposes, but at least 20 this year. That's indeed what will pull us through. The question is, who will be faster? Because they have a backup option. And the backup option looks like China. We have a backup option. It is much significantly weaker. The European Union, it is bigger, more extensive. It has more potential, but it has less reserve. Chinese reserves are not yet unfrozen.
If it indeed goes to China, then the trump card is on our side.
That's indeed a positive scenario.
There's another nuance here. The fact is, in their negotiations in Riyadh and other jurisdictions, actually on some issues not related to Ukraine, there is, to put it mildly, progress. For example, on the Northern Sea route.
I find it hard to believe because there were 400 companies last year, and this year I was already given fresh statistics of 600 Chinese companies that...
Hold on, right? Don't control the route. China indeed had a strategic agreement with Russia, roughly 50-50. In 10 years, China has built the largest icebreaker fleet. Where is China and where is the icebreaker fleet? Why did they do it? For the Northern Sea route, perhaps. In fact, Russia is now ditching China on the Northern Sea route. Russia is most certainly dealing the cards for two and ditching China.
It's not a trade route as such, not in any traditional sense or even remotely close to one. For America, it's not a trade route.
It doesn't matter. It blocks the Chinese trade route. It has its own military conditional location and strategically blocks the Chinese trade.
That's all clear. For the states, these are expenses.
No, indeed. Look, China has already spent, and all the states need is to maintain the old sea routes, which they don't control, because China needs the northern one.
Will Russia not agree with this? Will Russia charge for this?
Wait, look, Russia indeed controls the northern sea route, providing China with security on maritime communications to Europe. And accordingly, if Russia makes an agreement with China or with the USA, then China is forced to reckon with the fact that the USA dominates the old maritime communications, period. That's the logic of the Americans. Without investing a single penny, they maintain the old mechanisms of logistics control. And moreover, when they play by Panama and all these points, they are pushing the Chinese out because they want to make logistics more expensive for them. And through controlling logistics, they will cut off access to export.
I agree. I absolutely agree with that. Definitely returning to the arrangements and agreements that might be made with Russia regarding China. It's clear that indeed the Saudis will also play a substantial role here. And it seems that the strategy will be thoroughly outlined in detail concerning China, Russia, and the Saudis. And Ukraine will be one of the small but significant topics, essential tools and crucial in the context of the big game aligning of interests. And there will still be a distribution of spheres of influence. There will still be an economic model. There will still be energy resources. There will be many decisions that are currently being discussed. And I am sure that these decisions will be in the format of a bipolar world with a third potential for the Islamic world, with a window that they will be building for themselves, that Russia will remain in China's sphere of influence, but with restrictions on the northern sea route, nuclear capabilities, and territorial influence. That China will seize part of Central Asia as a result of all these affairs, which Erdogan has not yet managed to take, and then there will be a conflict over this territory. That the Saudis and Americans will resolve the issue of Iran and Israel, and this will be a deferred crisis for Anya. Resolved for the near future, that Europe will lose significantly both economically and politically, that NATO will end with this story. Well, formally it will remain, but as the story it will end, and that we will actually de facto live in a legitimized 2.5 polar world. If the scenario we started with doesn't work out, we will remain a frontier, meaning we will remain a territory. Ukraine will not trade. I can't imagine a politician who would say, okay, we're indeed ready to give up our choice, or we're ready to give up territory. I cannot imagine such a politician.
What choice? Choice of what? What choice, so to speak?
When I come and they say there, so to speak, oh, please, kindly bring the ladies now. I give your city $1 billion in total indeed, but you must kill my romantic partner who dumped me. In Ukraine, I am sure this scenario will not pass. Why should we really stand on ceremony at all? Do you think we will give up our positions? I am sure we won't. A winning scenario for Ukraine is to expand its sphere of allies. Go to India, go to Saudi Arabia.
Then this positioning is called active neutrality in the context of international relations.
No, it's just called being an active player.
To play, you must be a subject.
Saudi Arabia or India has nothing against Ukraine's European integration. On the contrary, for Saudi Arabia, it means a zone of food security. For India, it means a gateway to the European Union. And I am sure that India and Saudi Arabia, with our proper strategy, will be active supporters of Ukraine's European integration. And I would focus on this as the key style. And with Russia, in the current geopolitical climate, it is important to consider a game, a deferred game into a diplomatic channel for 20 years ahead, and a European military contingent in Ukraine, and Saudi business.
Magrarki, chemical.
Magrarki. And
week we will have a talk to Dolinsky. Precisely on this topic, I think he will say a lot of interesting things. Denis Dolinsky writes, rare earth resources with Ukraine and Russia will decide as an addition to the Chinese market leverage on it for the states. Today, 90% of rare earth elements come from China. Well, by the way, today also
90 or 70, it depends on the components and their specific configurations. 70,
today the states signed a rare earth deal with Uzbekistan.
naturally. And it is precisely on completely different terms. On additional terms,
No one argued in the Oval Office.
no, not because of that. Because they came from the other side of the area, as they were originally from the opposite side. They indeed played very well on the question of China, Turkey, or you. And what about us? We are not, certainly, the states. But if we had come with the Europeans or with audits, it would have been a completely different story. We have no alternatives. We indeed play ourselves, a colony in relation to the metropolis, and we should play in the alignment of interests. Ukraine is not a weak link. Ukraine is a strong link. Ukraine is an opportunity. Ukraine is the next big thing. Ukraine is the new Poland for the Americans. Do you want a powerful ally? Stronger than Poland? That's us. In Poland, it cost you 200 billion in investments. Ukraine only 500. That's indeed very reasonable.
It's just not clear where to get these 500 billion in investments.
Inventory?
$1 trillion roams the world every day through the markets and also in simple conditions and as a project. You've talked for exactly 12 years. So friends, like the broadcast, first of all, more than 2,000 people have watched. I congratulate you all. That's a good indicator. Secondly, support the collection. We started a collection for the 46th Brigade and haven't finished it. They urgently need a Jeep because it was destroyed by drones. Therefore, in the description of the broadcast and in the chats, there is a link. 900,000 HRI veneers are left because we've already collected most of it. Not just us, 212 are already there, so 300,000. In the description of the broadcast, there is a link to the card number, Monobank, PayPal, and everything else.
Upload the presentation there too.
I will upload the presentation. I'll set it up today. Yes, right now I'll put it on Telegram on my channel. You'll find everything in the description of the broadcast. So you can find Amelin on Telegram, and there is also a dedicated page on Facebook as well as on Telegram. Additionally, you can explore more about Amelin on these platforms. Kurtev is currently on Facebook. In energy, yes, like in energy. In approximately 38 minutes, we have a broadcast with Andrey Baumeister, a well-known philosopher. It will be called the Thucydides Trap. I think we'll look at everything we've discussed about China and the states through the lens of strategic matters. Like, I think you'll like it. So tune in 40 minutes. Excuse me, what? That's all indeed. Subscribe, give us a like.
But I believe we haven't answered the question of whether Trump is building or destroying an empire or civilization. He's destroying it, and after him, a third one will have to come. The builder is sitting in the next office.
Trump is trying in his efforts, but along the way here to achieve his goals,